It was well after midnight when Nigel left Fenn's room in St. Christopher's to return to the Mason Sceptre. Their talk had been of old acquaintances, old days, of the present state of the college, and of the effects of the war on the university as a whole. Morons, Fenn had said of the present set of undergraduates. Sophomores. And from the glimpses Nigel had had of them, he was greatly inclined to agree. The average age of the college had been much reduced, and a sort of standard public school prefect's common room type had superseded the more adult eccentricities and individualities which had existed before the war. Then again there were more people reading science and fewer reading arts, and this Nigel, with the instinctive snobbery of the arts-man, deplored. But throughout the evening he had been distrait. Something of the tangled implications of the Usiet situation had been conveyed to him by that brief conversation before dinner, and he was now less inclined to be amused than he had been at first. He remembered Donald Fellows trembling with rage in his chair, Nicholas's cold sneer, Robert's instinctive, almost physical repugnance for the girl, and there were other threads which as yet he had not seen. A little vaguely he wondered how the situation would resolve itself. Probably, like most of these impasses, it would melt away with the removal of one or more of the elements. Nigel, who was naturally lazy, deplored hasty decisions and decisive steps, and always waited until the situation had altered and the decision no longer had to be made. Doubtless it would all smooth itself out this time, somehow. He slept soundly and woke late. It was already 10:30 by the time he set for the theatre. He cursed himself for allowing himself to be so late. The theatre was 10 minutes' brisk walking from the hotel, near the outskirts of the city, a little drawn back from a long residential street which also served as the main road to a neighbouring town. Contemplating it in the fresh, clear autumn sunlight, Nigel wondered if we didn't sometimes do the Victorians an injustice by invariably condemning their architecture as graceless. Certainly in the present case the unknown artist had succeeded in conveying an impression of mellow, if slightly effeminate, charm to the building. It was a big place, built in soft yellow stone, and fronted by a wide lawn, where on summer evenings the audience would stroll with drinks and cigarettes during the interval. The greater part of the building had been simply restored. Only the proscenium, stage, dressing-rooms and bar had been completely modernized. The latter, which was on the first floor behind the circle, and to which 2 flights of steps led up from either side of a foyer, in a witty pastiche of the original style, which blended charmingly with it. The 2 box offices, too, had been provided with broad sheets of glass in place of the tiny Roman arches through which transactions have to be carried on in the majority of old theatres. Nigel slipped quietly into the darkened stalls, still feeling annoyed with himself for being so late. He'd wanted to watch all the rehearsals and get some idea of how a play was actually built up to the first performance. He was surprised, however, to find that next to nothing was happening. Later he realized that this is the case with about 1/3 of every repertory rehearsal. Under working lights on the stage, a few people stood or sat inactively about in the middle of a current play's set, holding typed books and smoking or chattering in a subdued manner. A young woman, who Nigel took to be the stage manager, was banging chairs and tables about so energetically that Nigel expected them to fall to pieces at any moment. Robert stood talking to someone behind the orchestra pit, across which an unsteady-looking plank was laid to provide passage from the stage to the front of the house. A young man vaguely played a few bars of jazz on the piano in the orchestra pit. "I wish we could get a move on," he said to someone on the stage. "Clive hasn't turned up yet." "Well, can't we do the second act?" "He's in all the acts." "Where in God's name is he, then?" "He said he was catching the 8:30 from town. Either it is fantastically late, or he has missed it. What does the man keep rushing up to town for, anyway?" "He goes to see his wife." "Good heavens! Every night?" "Yes." "Good heavens!" It was all curiously unreal, thought Nigel. The effort of artificial light, probably. It had not previously occurred to him how little actors and actresses see of the sun. He became suddenly aware that he was unintentionally eavesdropping the conversation of 2 people who were standing in the darkness near him. "But, darling, must you run about after him like that?" "Don't be silly, darling. One's got to be nice to these people if one's going to get on at all." "You mean in the theatre you've got to use your sex to get yourself jobs? Well, you surely don't imagine people get parts out of sheer acting ability." He wasn't sure who the voices belonged to. He could hear them, but they were speaking too quietly for easy identification. Someone in the electrician's gallery switched on a flood, and in the momentary dazzle Nigel saw that the two were Donald and Yuziette. He felt uneasily that he ought to move, but curiosity compelled him to stay. Neither of them had noticed him. "If only you wouldn't be so damnably jealous, darling. Yuziette, dear, you know how much I love you." "Oh, God, yes, I know. Of course, it's a damned nuisance for you when you are not in love with me." "Oh, darling, I've told you I love you. But after all, I do have my career as well." "Jane!" Robert's voice came suddenly from the front. "Ring for Yuziette, will you, dear? I want to run through the song with her." "It's all right, darling, I'm here." She went down the gangway. The little group on the stage began to disperse in various directions. "Don't go away, people. Just clear the stage. This won't take long. And we've got to make a start afterwards, whether Clive's arrived or not. Somebody'll have to read his part. Did you get a dance routine worked out?" "Yes, but I didn't know how it was going to be set. Will it be as it is now?" "Is this all for the first act, Richard?" Robert appealed to the scenic designer. "The flats in the OP will be further back," said Richard, "and there's no table. Jane! Jane, dear!" The stage manager appeared from a prompt corner like a rabbit out of a hat. "Jane, that table's much further upstage." "Sorry, Richard, but if you remember, it's fixed down. We can't take it up now. We had a hell of a job of it in the first place." Never mind. Do the best you can for the moment. Bruce, dear boy," he added to the young man in the orchestra pit, "you'll play it for the moment, won't you? Straight through, 2 choruses." "Yes, all right. Why was I born? Why am I living? Yes, that's the one. It's an old song, but quite nice. Now then, Yuziette, dear, what in God's name is the cue? Oh, yes. Clive says, 'Well, get on and sing the thing, if you must.' Quiet, please. Oh, 'Well, get on and sing the damn thing, if you must.'" The pianist played a couple of bars, and Yuziette began to sing. "Why was I born? Why am I—" Sorry. Just a minute. Yuziette, dear, you'll be upstage centre at the beginning. Now, we'll get the moves for the song set later, so do what you like at the moment, but there, that's better. Good, excellent. Get on, and whatever it is, diddle, diddle, diddle." Robert retired backwards up the gangway, and the music began again. Nigel went across to Donald. "Hello." Donald, whose eyes had been fixed on the stage, started violently. "Oh, hello. I couldn't think who it was for a moment. Let's go and sit down, shall we?" When it got settled, Nigel's attention went back to the stage again. Against his inclination, he was forced to admire the way Yuziette sang, adopting for the occasion a slight American accent and a slight lisp. She put it across beautifully. It was all very provocatively sexy. "Why was I born? Why am I living? What do I get? What am I giving? Why do I want the things I dare not hope for? What can I hope for? I wish I knew. Why do I try to draw you near me? Why do I cry? You never hear me. I'm a poor fool, but what can I do? Why was I born to love you?" The song over, the young man at the piano played through another chorus with a bored expression, and Yuziette danced. She danced well, too, with a sort of naive seductiveness. But it didn't seem to please Donald. Wretched display. I can't think how these women can bring themselves to do that sort of thing. Yet they seem to love it. Quite harmless, you know. I suppose it's the music. It's the sex. They adore showing it off that way. Well, I suppose it's not surprising that a woman should enjoy making an elementary form of sexual advance to a roomful of men without the slightest chance, so to speak, of being taken at her word. Must be a most delightful feeling. Wouldn't you mind if it were your wife? No, I don't think I... Right. The conversation was cut short by the conclusion of the song and Robert's voice. That was much better. It was lovely, dear. Thank you. Did you really like it, darling? 1 or 2 things may have to be altered when we get it properly set. He was sternly refusing to be drawn beyond the bounds of conventional politeness. Oh, and Jane, dear, will you ring for everyone now? We're going to do Act 1. Oh, and has Clive arrived yet? Yes, he's just got in. Thank God for that. The call bell clamoured vociferously all over the theatre. The company assembled little by little, including the miserable Clive, a bland young man in a black hat, who seemed quite unaware of the delay he had caused, and after a while the rehearsal was launched. About halfway through the act, a girl approached Donald and Nigel, whom Nigel had not met before. It was Jean Whiteleg, and with her appearance Nigel realised he had found yet another part of the triangle whose centre was Yuziette, and which had been so aggravated by Robert's arrival. But the girl was madly in love with Donald, there was no doubt. Little tricks of speech, gestures, everything made it obvious to the very blindest. Nigel groaned inwardly. He couldn't imagine what Jean saw in Donald. He thought him rather a silly little man, and even less could he imagine what Donald saw in Yuziette. It was all very difficult. He inquired politely whether she were watching the rehearsal.
No, I've been working here for the last few weeks. They let me do props out of term time.
Let you, indeed, thought Nigel, who knew enough about the theatre to be aware of the thanklessness of that job. Jean, he decided, was one of that all-too-large body of amateur actresses who get excited at the smallest contact with the professional stage and fritter away their lives in useless jobs connected with it. But while he was still summoning up an interested grimace, she turned and began talking to Donald in a low voice. Donald, Nigel saw, was becoming irritable under a stream of reproaches. Just a boring quarrel, he thought. Bitter, dull, and sordid and witless. Later he was to realise just how bitter these quarrels were, and to reproach himself for not paying more attention to them. At 11:45 they finished the act, and Nigel, who had been watching fascinated the way the thing came to life, even with the players reading and frequent interruptions to arrange moves, was sorry to hear Robert say, "All right, people, break for coffee. 1/4 hour early."
"There's coffee in the green room if you want it,"
said Jean to Nigel.
"And have you got a cello?"
No."
"And I don't suppose you'd lend it if you had, I know. I've got to get a cello from somewhere for next week."
"Right." She disappeared down the gangway. "Frankly," said Donald, "that girl's a nuisance." Something about his manner irritated Nigel suddenly. "I thought her charming." He went off down the gangway to see Robert, who was on the stage talking to the scenic designer and the stage manager. The company had melted away like magic, the women to the green room for coffee, the men for the most part to the Aston Arms across the road. Robert greeted Nigel a little absently. "I hope you're not finding it dull." "Good heavens, no, it's fascinating, and a very delightful play, if I may say so." "Oh, well, I'm glad you like it. But of course it's only the skeleton of the whole thing. No business yet, no props, but the company's much better than I dared hope. If only they can be induced to learn their lines properly." "Are they likely not to?" "I gather 1 or 2 make a point of drying about 6 times every night until the Friday. However, we shall see. Are you having coffee?" "If I shan't be drinking someone else's." "Good Lord, no. Do you know where the green room is? If you don't, Jane will show you. I'll be down in a minute. We can't afford to break for long, I'm afraid." Jane was a slim, attractive young woman of 20 or thereabouts.
"You coming?"
"Oh, yes, right." Nigel looked around a little guiltily for Donald, but he disappeared. As they went out backstage, Nigel looked curiously about him, at the big electrician's gallery in the prompt corner, the flats stacked against the walls, the circular line which marked the edge of a revolving stage, the backs of the flats. He noticed these were scrawled with pictures of animals, caricatures of members of the company, and lines from past plays, relics of a sudden exuberance before an entrance or at a dress rehearsal. Even in repertory, with a new play every week, the excitement of a first night never becomes insipid. They went out of a swing door at the back, carefully sprung and padded to prevent banging, and up a short flight of stone stairs to the green room.
"Were you here for Yuziette's song?"
"I was, actually."
"And you liked it?"
"Very much," he said, not without truth.
"I'm understudying for her. I'm terrified I'm going to have to do it. I can't really sing a note, but Robert asked me to, so I suppose he thinks I can. But it's going to be a bore having to learn lines for 1,000 to 1 possibility."
"Yes." Nigel was thinking of Helen, who had not appeared in the first act.
"I suppose Helen Haskell's on at the beginning of the second act." "Helen?" "Yes, that's right, my love. She's probably in the green room now."
Nigel was slightly taken aback. He was not yet used to the vague and indiscriminate terms of endearment which fly about in the theatre. They entered the green room. It was tolerably full, and Jane was some time getting him some coffee. Having presented it to him, she abruptly disappeared, leaving him to his own devices. It slightly hurt his vanity to find that nobody took any notice of him. He saw Helen sitting by herself, looking at a copy of Metromania. He decided to take the bull by the horns, and went over and sat down beside her. "Hello," he said, not without some trepidation.
"Hello,"
she replied, giving him a charming smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting you learning your words," he pursued ungrammatically, somewhat emboldened.
"Good Lord, no, not at this time of the week. Do tell me who you are. I hear you've been in front. It must have been dreary."
"Damn the woman," thought Nigel. "She makes me feel like a baby. I'm sure I look awful." He automatically put up a hand to smooth back his hair. "I wish she weren't so attractive. Or do I? I'm Nigel Blake."
"Oh, yes, of course. Robert's told me about you. And Gervais."
"I didn't know you knew then." "Anyway, don't take any notice of anything he's told you about me. He just says the first thing that comes into his head."
"Oh, that's a pity. It was rather complimentary. Still, when I know you better, I shall be able to tell for myself."
"Will you have lunch with me?"
"Oh, I'd love to, but I doubt if we shall finish much before 2:30. That's getting awfully late, isn't it?"
"Dinner, then?"
"Well, we go up at 7:45, and I have to be in fairly early to change and make up. I should have to rush away madly. How about tea?"
"Oh, yes." Then they both laughed. "Supper," said Nigel firmly, "after the show. Tea's a rather dull meal. Perhaps I can persuade the hotel to let us have it in my sitting room."
"Oh, la, sir, what a suggestion!"
"Oh, I mean, it doesn't matter where. I'll pick you up after the show. What time?"
"About 10:30.
"Lovely." Robert came in, and after a brief nod to Nigel, began talking to Helen about her part. So he wandered off on his own, precariously balancing his coffee cup in his left hand. Donald, Usiette, and Jean Whiteleg were in a little group by one of the windows, and the atmosphere looked far from intimate. With a vague idea of pouring oil on troubled waters, Nigel walked over to join them.
"Hello, Nigel," drawled Usiette as she saw him. "Have you been enjoying the masterpiece?"
"I like it."
"How curious. What about little Jean here?"
Jean began to speak, but Usiette interrupted.
"It's all appallingly superficial, of course, and no opportunity for real acting, but no doubt dear Rachel's name will bring them in, like wasps round a jam pot."
Mentally, Nigel added himself to the already overburdened list of those who disliked Usiette Haskell. To his own surprise, he found himself remarking dogmatically, "Comedy is necessarily superficial, I suppose, and the technique of comedy acting, even if it is different from the technique of acting in serious plays, isn't any less difficult."
"Oh, Nigel! Oh, how clever you are! We all thought you knew nothing about the theatre."
He flushed. "I know very little about the theatre, but I've seen enough of actors and actresses to resent their assumption that they are the only people who do." Usiette, feeling that the possibilities of unpleasantness in this topic had been too rapidly exhausted, changed the subject.
"I see you've introduced yourself to my sister. Don't you think she's attractive?"
"I think she's very attractive."
"So does Richard. I think they're quite serious about each other. Don't you?"
Nigel's heart sank. He knew Usiette was being malicious, but there might be some foundation in what she said.
"They're attached to one another, are they?" "Oh, yes, of course. I thought everyone knew."
"Oh, but you've been here such a short time. Why should you? Anyway, I'm sure it's a matter of complete indifference to you." Nigel was about to say, "It is," but stopped himself in time. If he did, there was every possibility Usiette would tell Helen at the earliest possible opportunity. Childish intriguing and hypocrisy. But Usiette's game was one which, temporarily at least, she compelled those with her to play too. "On the contrary, as I said, I find your sister very attractive." He was relieved to hear a cool, sensible voice behind him. Rachel. Hello, Nigel. Are you enjoying this chaotic rehearsal? Silly question. I expect everyone's asked you that anyway. You must be tired of answering it. Oh, no. Oh, on the contrary, I've got quite used to saying yes, I am, and watching the incredulity on people's faces. Well, it'll brighten up towards the end of the week. Now, come with me. I don't think you like Yuziette. Frankly, I don't. You? Nasty little creature. They both laughed, and the conversation drifted to other subjects. Robert's voice was suddenly heard saying, "Jane, dear, go over to the Aston and bring the men back, will you? We're going to begin Act 2 immediately." "Oh, thank God, I've finished. I shall have quite a pleasant week of doing next to nothing," Yuziette said. "Yuziette," said Jean Whiteleg abruptly, "I want to talk to you about Donald." "Oh? What is there to talk about Donald, may I ask?" "Donald, darling, you'd better go away. We're about to talk about you. You'll get insufferably vain if you listen to two women fighting over you." "Oh, for God's sake, Jean!" But Jean could wait no longer. She burst out, "Why don't you leave him alone? You know you're not interested in him, except when there's nothing else in trousers to go about with. Now you've got your precious Robert, so stop playing about with him and leave him alone. Leave him alone, I say. You don't love him, and you never have. You don't love anything except your own vanity and conceit." "Jean, dear, don't," said Donald uncomfortably. "Oh, don't you be such a gutless little swine. Can't you see it? Can't you see it's for your own good? For your own good, damn you!" "Why, Jean, dear, I really believe you're jealous. Surely a pretty, intelligent girl like you has no need to worry about any rival. Surely you've only got to lift a little finger. Donald will do anything you ask." "I hate you! You're a bloody little—" "Oh, dear." Rachel came across and grabbed Jean tightly by the arm. "Jean, I need your help. You know I'm going to want a big modern picture to bring on in the first act. Well, it's just occurred to me that you can get one from that little shop in the Turl. It will do admirably. It's a reproduction of a Wyndham Lewis. I think it'd be a good thing if you went and got it now. Bye." "I think you might be more careful, Yuziette. 1 or 2 more scenes like that, and you'll have the whole company at loggerheads. I've no intention of having my affairs criticised in public by a child like that. And certainly it's no business of yours in any case. Come on, Donald, let's get out of this damned place. Apparently it's one of the latest rules of repertory that the producer's mistress can talk to the company however she pleases. What that madam needs is a darned good spanking." The company reassembled on the stage, but a mood of depression had descended on the rehearsal. The news of Yuziette's little scene with Jean had passed with lightning rapidity from mouth to mouth, and the always mercurial spirits of the company sank to the bottom. Nigel watched for some time longer, but he slipped away shortly before 1 o'clock, and returned very thoughtfully to the Mace and Sceptre for his lunch. It was nearly a week later that he realized he had heard something that morning which would enable him to identify a murderer.